Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to pull back that delicate lace-trimmed curtain and take a long, unflinching look at one of history's most brutal endurance tests. We're talking about pregnancy in Victorian England. This was an era before gender reveals existed, before anyone had even heard of prenatal yoga, and certainly before anyone dreamed up something called a birth playlist. Welcome instead to the 19th century, a time of magnificent mustaches, wallpaper poisoned with arsenic, and some truly spectacular ideas about how women's bodies actually work. So before you get yourself settled into the most breathable nightgown you can find, brew up a proper cup of tea, take a long, steady breath, and maybe grab a heating pad, because you're going to need both of those things. And if you happen to enjoy these deep dives into the miserable parts of history, you should absolutely subscribe and tell me in the comment section how many pillows it actually takes you to get comfortable these days. For some of us, the answer is literally all of them. Now go ahead and dim those lights. Turn on that fan if you've got one so you can feel a gentle breeze, and let's take ourselves on a trip back to an era when morning sickness lasted from sunrise to sunset, when self-care meant fainting decoratively on a couch, and when doctors genuinely believed that bleeding you was a reasonable treatment for almost literally everything. Have you ever stopped to wonder what pregnancy actually felt like when you were living in the Victorian age? No ultrasounds to check on your baby, no vitamins to support your health, no privacy whatsoever, just gossip, superstition, and enough cabbage soup to last you through an entire winter. Could you have survived 9 months sharing a bedroom with your mother-in-law, 10 children, and a persistent suspicion that every single person blames you for the weather? Well, congratulations, because it's now 1857, you're pregnant, you're mildly confused about how this all happened, and someone has already told absolutely everyone within a 5-mile radius. Try not to worry too much about it, dear. The very first sign that you might be expecting isn't a test stick, because those don't exist yet. It's actually your neighbor, Mrs. Chumley, marching up to announce it to the entire parish because you didn't faint at church this week like you usually do. Welcome to Victorian England, where privacy is genuinely a myth, medicine is really just creative guessing, and pregnancy is very much treated as a public spectacle. From the moment you so much as burp in an odd way during afternoon tea, you become the subject of an unspoken but very real citywide diagnostic panel. Forget about those clear blue tests or nervous late-night Googling sessions. Diagnosis in the Victorian era comes with a heaping side of gossip and a full parade of relatives showing up at your door. Mrs. Chumley, who has the hearing of an actual bat and the subtlety of a marching band, is always the first to declare that you're expecting a child. She makes this grand announcement while standing 2 feet from your window, her voice projecting through thin glass like a foghorn of doom. The mailman learns before you do. The grocer finds out before you've even confirmed it yourself. This naturally triggers an entire chain reaction that moves through your community like wildfire. First, your mother-in-law arrives, clutching her copy of the Book of Household Management, her face showing a mixture of forced delight and barely concealed terror. She's ready to impart ancient wisdom that's dubious at best. Then comes your aunt, there to ensure you haven't simply eaten too much pie and called it a pregnancy. Someone always recommends sitting very quietly and thinking about sheep. If you thought you'd have time to process this news privately, think again. Victorian society has what we might call A group chat, except it's literally every woman within a mile radius and one highly suspicious grocer. Medical confirmation is no less ridiculous than the neighborhood diagnosis. If you're fortunate enough to be wealthy enough for a doctor, he arrives in a carriage armed with an umbrella, a stiff upper lip, and all the scientific insight of a slightly confused scarecrow. The Victorian pregnancy test is mostly just a series of vague questions. Do you feel tired? Are you looking particularly pale? Have you recently wept over a decorative spoon? If you answer yes to any of these, congratulations. That's apparently all the evidence needed. And if you're still unsure about your condition, your doctor will probably recommend a brisk walk, a raw egg, or simply not thinking about it so much. In rare, cutting-edge cases, a urine sample might be sent to a chemist who will poke at it with a stick and declare you either pregnant, dying, or possibly both simultaneously. But for most people, confirmation is less medical and more mystical. Enter the midwife, a pillar of local superstition armed with herbal concoctions, terrifying stories, and hands rougher than churchyard gravel. She'll perform the time-honored diagnostic method known as staring at you intently and poking your abdomen with the enthusiasm of a cat demanding bread. If she decides the shape of your belly looks promising, you're pregnant. If she's having a particularly bad day, it might just be wind. Of course, the signs are absolutely everywhere if you believe the Victorians. Your hair is glossier than usual? Definitely a boy. You're craving pickled onions? Twins for sure. You dream about cows? Ah, my dear, that's supposedly a sign you'll have an easy labor or possibly just indigestion. The science here is decidedly loose. For a lucky or unlucky few, the first real sign comes with the unmistakable return of morning sickness, which in Victorian code means, please excuse me while I go throw up discreetly behind the rosebush. This becomes a helpful social signal. If you're caught holding your stomach and looking nauseated during prayer, people will draw their own conclusions, usually before you've even opened your mouth. Privacy, as you might have guessed, is essentially non-existent. Before you can even finish your first ginger biscuit, the news has spread throughout your entire neighborhood. The postman winks at you knowingly. The butcher offers you extra liver for strength. And Mrs. Chumley, now completely vindicated in her earlier suspicions, offers to lend you her lucky birthing shawl, a piece of fabric that's allegedly delivered 19 children and at least 2 healthy goats. By the end of the week, you're an open book. Your symptoms have become public property. Your uterus is suddenly the subject of more local speculation than the price of potatoes. Welcome to the Victorian pregnancy experience, where everyone else knows you're expecting sometimes before you've even fully realized it yourself. And the only thing more reliable than local gossip is the absolute certainty that you'll never, ever be alone again. There's no Instagram post announcing your news, just a series of knowing glances, a few muffled gasps, and your mother-in-law clutching her pearls so hard they nearly shatter under the pressure. By dinner time, the entire village knows. The vicar is already working pregnancy into his sermon about the perils of pride. Victorian England doesn't believe in subtlety. News travels at the speed of candle gossip, which, if you're wondering, is roughly 4 times faster than a carrier pigeon and only slightly slower than a nosy neighbor running through the streets. The moment the family suspects you're expecting, the information disperses like fog rolling over the moors, seeping under doors, around corners, and through every crack in what you thought was your privacy. It starts right at home, with your husband giving you that wide-eyed, shell-shocked look of a man who's just realized he'll soon have to share his favorite armchair with another tiny, screaming human. He doesn't say much, because Victorian men are famously tight-lipped, especially when confronted with news involving biology. Instead, he clears his throat, fiddles with the cold scuttle, and mutters something about needing a brisk walk to clear his head. By the time he returns, 3 relatives have already arrived, and the cat's been shooed off the good cushion to make room for visitors. Your mother-in-law is next, bustling in like an emotional thunderstorm. She swings wildly between joy, anxiety, and a sharp eye for any sign that you might be doing it wrong. She immediately takes charge of the narrative, hinted darkly about her own 14 labors, and offering advice that involves goose fat, prayer, and never letting your feet touch bare earth. Her expression says, "Congratulations," but her hands are already halfway through knitting a christening cap, just in case you're not moving fast enough. As the sun sets, the circle widens considerably. Your aunt, who hasn't visited since the Crimean War, suddenly arrives to reminisce about the time she nearly died, but not quite during childbirth, and survived only because of a diet of boiled onions and sheer grit. Cousins you didn't even know you had dropped by, peeking at your stomach like it's a mystical orb. Everyone is suddenly an expert. Every comment is both advice and a subtle warning about what could go wrong. Eat plenty of marrows, dear, unless you fancy having a particularly small baby. Don't laugh at funerals or terrible things might happen. Sleep facing north because apparently that matters. The instructions accumulate until your mind resembles a cross-stitch sampler of superstition. But the pièce de résistance is the local vicar, that nosy person who hears about your condition while collecting tithes and instantly adds you to his spiritual to-do list. He appears at your door with the solemnity of a man who has come to bless the new railway, except he's there to drop hints about virtue, humility, and accepting God's will, even when it's noisy and colicky. By Sunday, the entire parish has gotten wind of your situation, and you find yourself the unintentional centerpiece of a sermon. The miracle of life, my friends, let us reflect on humility, temperance, and not seeking attention. All eyes in the church discreetly swivel in your direction. You try to hide behind your hymn book, but the organist is already smiling at you with the secret knowledge of one who's had 7 children and somehow survived. Meanwhile, you can completely forget about discretion. Victorian etiquette claims to cherish privacy, but the reality is more like a community theater production where everyone has a part to play. The grocer adds an extra turnip for the little one. The milkman gives you a knowing wink and doubles your order without asking. Even the local stray dog seems to be congratulating you, possibly hoping for table scraps in the near future. You never really announce your pregnancy. You simply try to keep up as it's announced for you by family, neighbors, clergy, and the entire ecosystem of people who thrive on the news of a new baby. The result is that you're smothered in well-meaning advice, gently drowned in social obligations, and swept up in a tidal wave of half-remembered traditions. By the end of the week, your only real achievement is surviving without accidentally agreeing to name your child after the vicar, your aunt, or the family cat. Congratulations! You're about to become a parent in Victorian England, and apparently so is everyone else. Forget about gentle nausea. Victorian morning sickness is a relentless all-day struggle with breakfast, lunch, and whatever someone claims is soup. The remedies include ginger, brisk walks, and occasionally a spot of cherry prescribed by a doctor with a deeply concerning mustache. The experience of pregnancy nausea in the Victorian age is a masterclass in understatement. The term morning sickness suggests something delicate, perhaps a mild inconvenience that fades with the sunrise. Not so in Victorian times. The Victorians simply hadn't invented the phrase all day, every day, "Please stop the world and let me lie down." In reality, you're locked in a ceaseless battle with your stomach, which has chosen this particular moment in history to develop the sensitivity of a Victorian spinster confronted by exposed ankles. Your day starts before dawn as the first bird outside your window trills a note suspiciously reminiscent of dry heaving. Victorian houses with their creaky floorboards and mysterious drafts seem specially engineered to magnify the aromas of boiled cabbage, pipe smoke, and the faint but unmistakable scent of despair. Your first task each morning is making it from bed to the chamber pot before anyone notices you're trying to navigate the hallway while clutching your stomach and praying you don't faint and become the next item of village gossip. Breakfast is less of a meal and more of a dare. Your loving spouse offers you a wedge of bread, yesterday's porridge, and the encouragement to try a little broth. "It'll settle your stomach," he assures you. Broth in Victorian England can mean anything from beefy ambrosia to a gray floating soup crime that appears to have developed its own ecosystem overnight. Every spoonful is a gamble. One whiff of boiled onions and you're running to the window for fresh air, which in the city smells suspiciously like horse. The parade of remedies begins immediately. Your neighbor, Mrs. Chumley, swears by ginger tea and drops off a packet so potent it could strip wallpaper. Your mother-in-law insists that the secret is plenty of brisk walks, as if taking the air will somehow outmaneuver your rebellious insides. And then there's the family physician, a man whose main qualifications are a pair of pince-nez spectacles and a pocket full of questionable tonics. He prescribes a spot of cherry just to steady the nerves, which, depending on your tolerance, either briefly numbs your symptoms or ensures that lunch becomes a repeat performance of breakfast. Now, if you're one of the unlucky many who can't keep food down, the list of helpful advice only grows exponentially. Have you tried eating while lying down? Try chewing on mint leaves, preferably ones the dog hasn't gotten to first. Someone always suggests ice-cold milk, despite the fact that refrigeration is still a far-off fantasy, and the milk arrives warm, unpasteurized, and occasionally accompanied by bits of hay. Others push dry toast, which, in the Victorian era, is less about comfort and more about whether you can actually chew through it without losing a filling. The cruelest irony is that morning sickness rarely sticks to a schedule. It sneaks up at tea time. It ambushes you during your afternoon knitting, right when the parlor is filled with guests and someone is waving a plate of mutton pies under your nose. Evenings are no better. Victorian dinners are a 5-cent assault of boiled everything, fatty cuts, and root vegetables that have clearly seen better centuries. Your misery is, of course, considered character building. Victorian society frowns on complaining. So you're encouraged to think happy thoughts and count your blessings. Even as your entire body is rebelling with the force of a steamboat explosion, friends and family are quick to remind you that this is all part of nature's plan. And after all, Queen Victoria herself supposedly endured it with nothing but a lace handkerchief and the stoicism of a granite statue. By bedtime, your only consolation is that the worst might be over. Then you remember there are still 8 months to go, and your stomach stages one last mutiny to see you off to sleep. The Victorians didn't have Tums, but they did have grit, determination, and apparently a stomach lined with iron or at least cherry. And so you drift off clutching a ginger root and silently vowing revenge on anyone who ever described this as just a little queasiness. You crave chalk or coal or maybe pickled eels on toast. Unfortunately, most cravings are met with a strict, flavorless diet of boiled beef and tapioca, while your aversions, like the smell of wet wool and your husband's pipe, are completely inescapable. Cravings during Victorian pregnancy are not the cute, Instagrammable variety where someone posts a photo of peanut butter on ice cream and gets supportive comments. Here, cravings are a test of your willpower, your family's tolerance, and frankly, your dignity. The phrase, eating for two, is misleading. You're really eating for one, but desperately wishing you could send the other half of yourself out for something edible. It never fails. Whatever your heart or stomach desires is either forbidden, extinct, or only found in the kitchens of the French aristocracy. Your neighbor remembers craving raw turnips soaked in vinegar. Your mother-in-law claims she survived on a steady diet of boiled carrots and gentle disappointment. You meanwhile stare out the window and wonder if it's entirely improper to gnaw on a hunk of coal from the fireplace. It's not just you. Victorians believed in the mysterious force of longings. The notion that your craving, if unmet, would result in a baby born with a strawberry mark or possibly the soul of cabbage. No pressure whatsoever. At every meal, you find yourself face to face with a Victorian dietary regime. Boiled beef, which has all the flavor and excitement of a wet sock. Potatoes that have been cooked until they surrender their last hope. And puddings that seem to have been designed to insult your palate as gently as possible. Even the treats have a quality of blandness. Plain tapioca, perhaps, or blancmange, a dessert so bland it could pass as punishment. You plead for something spicy? The response is scandalized silence, as if you've just proposed inventing jazz. Meanwhile, your body develops aversions with the efficiency of a bureaucrat. The smell of wet wool, a constant in every home, every hallway, every item of clothing, suddenly triggers deep existential horror. Your husband's pipe, once a background aroma, now seems to fill every room with a burning echo of last week's kippers. There is no escape. Every friend, relative, and passing stranger is determined to cook cabbage, air out a dog blanket, or wander by wearing unwashed breeches. The advice you receive is naturally both abundant and completely useless. Give in to your cravings, but only if they're respectable. Never eat raw fruit unless it's poached, mashed, or prayed over by clergymen. Avoid pickles unless they're British. At some point, a relative presents you with a copy of Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, open to a chapter on delicate digestives. You discover to your horror that this translates to a week of thin porridge and something called sago soup, which tastes suspiciously like regret. Husbands, too, have their own theories. Some are supportive, trotting out to buy you oranges at great expense and returning victorious, only to discover you now crave onions dipped in vinegar. Others are more practical. Wouldn't you prefer a nice boiled egg? Becomes their constant battle cry. If you're lucky, they'll sneak you a forbidden chocolate. If you're not, you're back to bland beef and moral support. The only solace comes from sharing your cravings with fellow expectant mothers who swap stories in hushed tones over tepid tea. You learn that Emily next door spent a fortnight craving soot while her cousin wouldn't touch bread unless it was exactly 3 days old and soaked in elderflower cordial. No one judges. In Victorian England, craving chalk is a rite of passage. By evening, you're curled up, chewing thoughtfully on a bland biscuit, dreaming of the forbidden delights of pickled onions and candied ginger. And through it all, the one constant remains. Every strange urge, every hated scent, every desperate longing is met with Victorian resolve. You eat what you're given, pretend it's what you wanted, and reassure yourself with the comforting knowledge that historically everyone else was just as miserable as you. Maternity fashion is a fever dream of ribbons, whalebone corsets, and dresses designed to hide your condition, not accommodate it. Every step is a battle between dignity and the urge to breathe. Let's begin with the daily ritual of getting dressed, a process only slightly less complicated than assembling a Victorian railway. You are assisted or hindered by a maid, a mother-in-law, or on truly tragic mornings, your husband, who treats every button as if it might detonate. The goal is simple: appear utterly unprepared. Because in Victorian England, the only thing more scandalous than being unmarried and pregnant is being obviously pregnant at all. To achieve this miracle of social camouflage, your first weapon is the corset, a garment with all the flexibility of a garden gate and none of the charm. The standard corset is built for moral instruction and spinal realignment, not for expanding waistlines. If you're unlucky, you're forced into a maternity corset, a terrifying contraption advertised as healthful and accommodating by people who have clearly never worn one. It features mysterious lacing and trapdoors, promising to support the growing belly while gently reminding your lungs they are optional. Breathing becomes a strategic activity, best done in short, polite gasps. Layered on top are your petticoats, at least 3, each heavier and more determined than the last. These are followed by crinoline, an architectural marvel of steel hoops and fabric designed to create the illusion of a tiny waist by inflating everything else. The effect is spectacular from a distance, like a walking bell. Up close, it's a health hazard. Doorways are navigated sideways. Chairs are approached with a tactical squint. You live in constant fear of a small dog or enthusiastic toddler becoming trapped beneath your skirts. The dress itself is an engineering achievement. Yards of fabric draped, pleated, and gathered to perfection, always in colors that manage to highlight your paleness and never your mood. Many dresses feature high necks, long sleeves, and enough buttons to keep an entire sewing guild in business. All of this is designed not to flatter your changing figure, but to obscure it, as if your entire pregnancy is something to be negotiated with shadows and clever tailoring. In public, your outerwear must be even more discreet. Shawls are strategically arranged. Capes are thrown dramatically over shoulders. And if anyone asks why you look a bit flushed, you're expected to mutter something about the weather. Your family's main concern is not your comfort, but whether you might draw attention on the high street. Should a neighbor suspect you're in a delicate condition, you risk a wave of pointed stares and sympathetic nods, which in Victorian society is tantamount to being handed a scarlet letter and a megaphone. Footwear is unsurprisingly a forgotten afterthought. Shoes are dainty, heeled, and designed for women who do not walk. Pregnancy, however, is an adventure in swelling feet and shifting balance. The only thing standing between you and a spectacular public tumble is a single overworked button on your left shoe. Fashion magazines of the era suggest helpful tips like disguise your shape with elaborate sashes or adopt a demure waddle. Society, meanwhile, expects you to remain upright and graceful no matter how many layers you're lugging or how often you're distracted by the gentle internal kicking of your future heir. At the end of the day, you peel yourself out of your sartorial prison, ribs groaning in gratitude, corset strings bearing witness to the day's battle, modern maternity leggings and elastic waistbands feel like science fiction, luxuries of a distant utopia. You settle into your nightgown, which is mercifully loose, and reflect on the heroic endurance required simply to get dressed in Victorian England. So next time you slip on sweatpants, pause to thank your ancestors who survived the great age of corsets, crinolines, and the daily gamble of whether their outfit would let them breathe or just faint stylishly in the drawing room. Every neighbor is suddenly an expert on pregnancy. Don't look at the moon. Don't touch a toad. Don't eat strawberries if you don't want a strawberry-shaped baby. Your actual doctor will mostly nod along but recommend leeches just in case. Pregnancy in Victorian England isn't just a medical event. It's a full-contact sport of superstitions, folklore, and advice so questionable you start to suspect everyone is just making it up as they go. From the very moment Mrs. Chumley squints at your ankles and whispers, "Congratulations," the air becomes thick with a kind of advice fog. You can't walk down the street, fetch a turnip, or even sigh too loudly without someone materializing to offer a dire warning or a guaranteed remedy for a trouble you didn't know you had. The first wave comes from the older generation, grandmothers, great-aunts, and family friends who survived a dozen pregnancies each and have the opinions to prove it. If you crave vinegar, it means a girl, your great-aunt declares while she stirs her tea so violently you fear for the porcelain. Don't look at ugly people, she adds, or you'll have an ugly baby. You nod, wondering how to discreetly cover every mirror in the house. Some beliefs are oddly specific. Don't step over a cat, or your child will be born with a tail and possibly a deep fear of milk. If you drop a needle and it points north, you'll have a boy. If it points south, a girl. If it points east or west, the advice is to go back to bed and try again tomorrow. You're advised to keep a piece of iron in your pocket to ward off fairies and to never, under any circumstances, let a magpie see your belly. The rules multiply every week. The culinary warnings alone are enough to make you paranoid. Strawberries are strictly off limits unless you want a birthmark shaped like a berry on the child's cheek. Eating fish means your baby will be a good swimmer, while cabbage guarantees a quiet child. There is no evidence to support this, only generations of disappointed parents. Heaven forbid you fancy anything spicy. The local wisdom says you'll give birth to a fiery-tempered child or possibly just heartburn. Neighbors pass along their own family secrets, each stranger than the last. Hang a silver spoon above your bed to ensure an easy labor, not a red ribbon on your undergarments to confuse evil spirits. If you hear an owl at night, place onions under your pillow or you'll be in labor for 3 days. By the time you finish tea, you're wearing half the kitchen and considering moving to the attic. Your doctor, meanwhile, is a master of passive advice. He listens to the neighbor's tales with the same distant expression he uses when someone asks about washing hands. He doesn't outright dismiss the superstitions. After all, who wants to be blamed for a child born with a birthmark shaped like Wiltshire? Instead, he offers his own brand of 19th century wisdom. Keep calm. Avoid strong emotions and consider a leech for your nerves. It's unclear whether the leeches are for you or just a family tradition he can't quite let go. If you're unlucky enough to mention any ailment, swelling, headaches, the vapors, you're likely to receive a thick paste, a bitter herbal tonic, or the suggestion that you spend the afternoon sitting with your feet in cold cabbage water. It's as if everyone in your life attended a special seminar titled How to Terrify the Expectant Mother and took diligent notes. Through it all, you master the art of smiling, nodding, and quietly ignoring the most outlandish recommendations. You learn to accept every well-meaning warning with a grain of salt, or more likely, an entire salt cellar. The trick is surviving the barrage of tales without accidentally following any advice that leaves you clutching onions, iron, and cabbage while warding off passing cats. Victorian pregnancy is a marathon of nonsense and neighborly concern. In the end, the greatest test is not just carrying a baby, but carrying on with your sanity intact, one superstition at a time. Medical care is a roulette wheel of outdated theories, herbal brews, and the hope that you don't catch a chill. Bloodletting is still a thing. So is prescribing arsenic for nerves. Welcome to Victorian prenatal care, where a house call from the doctor is less reassuring and more of a warning shot. Today's visit involves a man with mutton chops, an encyclopedic knowledge of humors, and an unwavering belief that no ailment exists which can't be improved by either draining something out of you or putting something alarming into you. Your modern mind might long for an ultrasound, a vitamin supplement, or even a single well-washed thermometer. The Victorians, however, offer you a brisk pat on the hand, a prescription for laudanum, and a stern reminder to keep cheerful. The doctor's bag is a treasure chest of the era's medical marvels. Glass leech jars, a selection of tonics that would stun a mule, and a notebook filled with dramatic tales of successful interventions. Pregnancy, he informs you, is not a medical condition. It's a natural state, which is code for we have absolutely no idea what to do with you. If you're feeling sick, it's probably your fault for worrying too much, reading novels after sunset, or thinking unladylike thoughts. You are strongly encouraged not to think or to sit in a draft. Actual treatment, when it's given, is a unique combination of hope and hazard. For fatigue, the solution might be beef tea and plenty of rest, which is difficult when you're also expected to sweep the parlor, mend 11 pairs of socks, and entertain relatives who believe your feet should never be seen, let alone propped up for swelling. For headaches, the prescription is more direct. The application of leeches. Sometimes just the threat of leeches is enough to encourage miraculous recoveries. If you're suffering from the vapors or the general malaise of growing a whole human, a common suggestion is a refreshing dose of arsenic, strictly medicinal, of course, and not to be confused with the arsenic in the wallpaper. 2 kinds of poison, but only one is a prescription. Should you request advice for anxiety or nerves, the doctor will suggest either more fresh air or a tincture of liquid pure opium, which should settle the mind. It does mostly by making you forget what day it is, why you walked into the pantry, or indeed what you were worried about in the first place. If you're particularly unlucky, you'll be advised to bleed the patient a little just to balance the humors. Out comes the razor, and with it all hope for a relaxing afternoon. There are, of course, home remedies passed down through the family, each one more mysterious than the last. A mug of mugwort tea for strength, a paste of goose grease for swelling, compresses of vinegar and brown paper for headaches or for true emergencies, a boiled turnip tied around the neck. No two treatments are the same, and the only thing they all have in common is a total disregard for comfort or flavor. For the truly elite, there's spa treatment, which means being sent to a damp resort and bath, where you can soak in mineral water and listen to other wealthy women describe their own medical misadventures, usually involving fainting spells and a near-fatal encounter with a bad oyster. What you will not get is real prenatal vitamins, reliable diagnostic tools, or a professional who even remotely understands germs. What you will get is a rotating cast of relatives advising rest, home remedies that taste like regret, and the strong suggestion that your most important task is to keep cheerful and avoid any mention of pain, discomfort, or, heaven forbid, complications. By the end of it, Victorian prenatal care feels less like science and more like a darkly comedic obstacle course. You're left to hope that, like so many before you, you'll simply muddle through, armed with grit, superstition, and the knowledge that at least you dodged the boiled turnip necklace. One minute you're upright, the next you're out cold on the parlor rug while people debate whether to open a window or throw water on you. Victorian fainting is a competitive sport and, frankly, a handy excuse to escape awkward dinner conversations. Victorian pregnancy is a masterclass in involuntary public performances, and nowhere is this more apparent than with fainting fits. There's no warning, just a gentle swoon, a dramatic sigh, and suddenly you're horizontal, surrounded by a flurry of anxious relatives, and at least one person shouting, "Fetch the smelling salts." It's less a medical emergency and more an impromptu audition for the local amateur dramatic society. Everyone in the room knows their lines. Smelling salts, by the way, are the go-to cure for fainting, hysteria, and anything that can't be explained away with a cup of weak tea. A vial of ammonium carbonate waved under your nose is guaranteed to bring you round, if only because it smells like a chemical spill at a pickle factory. Your consciousness is less restored and more shocked back into your body, which is now even more confused than when it left. The cause of these fainting spells? The official answer is delicate nerves. The real answer is likely the combination of whalebone corsets, tight collars, lack of oxygen, relentless heat from the fireplace, and the emotional strain of having every bodily function become the neighborhood's favorite conversation topic. If you're very unlucky, someone will suggest your fits are fashionable, a sign of refinement. All the best ladies faint, especially in the presence of minor royalty or a well-dressed footman. Your main goal is to do it with grace. Try not to fall onto the tea tray or disrupt the knitting circle. Then there's hysteria, the Victorian catch-all for any symptom not covered by a handy feint. Feeling anxious? That's hysteria. Weepy for no reason? Hysteria. Annoyed by your husband's banjo practice? Hysteria. The medical profession, still haunted by the Greeks, is convinced that the wandering womb, yes, really, is to blame for all manner of female complaints. The prescription is a day of bed rest, a brisk walk, a cold compress, or for the truly distressed, a firm talking to from your mother-in-law. Nothing says cured like being lectured by someone who survived the Napoleonic Wars, armed only with a wooden spoon. Hysteria is both a diagnosis and a social event. If you're feeling dramatic, you can milk it for a week of lying in a darkened room, attended by whispering aunts, and at least one well-meaning cousin reading the Psalms at your bedside. It's the closest you'll come to a vacation until the baby arrives and you're promoted to exhausted mother. For those less inclined to theatrics, hysteria is a private misery quietly managed with long walks, embroidery, and the occasional illicit sigh. The real winners here are the family pets, who view every fainting fit as an opportunity to claim the warmest spot on the rug. The family cat is particularly adept at nestling beside your limp hand, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm here for the inheritance." Of course, fainting fits come with rules. You must never collapse in the scullery, too undignified, the garden, too muddy, or at the village fete, too public, unless you're after a marriage proposal. The preferred location is the drawing room, preferably onto a fainting couch, thoughtfully placed for just this purpose. The fainting couch, by the way, is the era's greatest invention. A piece of furniture designed for women to collapse onto when the weight of society, fashion, and overcooked cabbage becomes too much. Once you've revived, you're expected to rejoin the world, cheeks delicately flushed, and resume your place at the card table or the embroidery hoop as if nothing happened. Fainting in Victorian England isn't just tolerated. It's woven into the social fabric, a gentle reminder that when life becomes overwhelming, you can always take a moment or several minutes to drop out of it entirely. So if the pressures of Victorian pregnancy become too much, don't worry. There's always the fainting couch, a bottle of smelling salts, and a cast of anxious relatives ready to make your return to consciousness as dramatic as your exit. Whether you're married or not, everyone has an opinion about your pregnancy. Strangers, clergy, and the occasional goat have thoughts on your moral character, your future child, and whether you should be seen in public at all. In Victorian England, the moment you start to show or even sneeze in a suspiciously maternal manner, you are officially public property. It's not just your family who takes an interest, it's everyone. The entire village operates as a living, breathing comment section, only with more facial hair and fewer emojis. Stepping outside is less a pleasant stroll and more an audition for a never-ending morality play. The cast includes the butcher, 3 abbesses, the local vicar, and that one old man who's never spoken to you, but suddenly feels qualified to offer advice on child rearing. Let's start with the obvious. If you are married, congratulations. Your pregnancy is only moderately scandalous. You will be admired quietly and only when you're not present. Public praise is considered dangerous. It might go to your head, which Victorians believe is already under severe strain. You will, however, receive an endless supply of nods, raised eyebrows, and tight-lipped smiles that seem to say, "Well done," but don't make a fuss about it. Should you venture out for a walk, every neighbor you pass will glance at your belly, your shoes, your hat, and your companion, as if checking for compliance with an unwritten code of maternal conduct. Did you sit on a bench for too long? Mrs. Maple will whisper that you're overindulging. Did you walk too quickly? The grocer will mutter about risking the baby. You simply can't win. If you are unmarried or worse, newly married and showing too soon, the scrutiny intensifies. Your every movement is analyzed for evidence of impropriety. The local women gather in small clusters, pretending to discuss the price of flowers while absolutely dissecting your entire romantic history. The vicar's wife may suddenly take an interest in your spiritual well-being, inviting you to prayer meetings and offering unsolicited tracts on the importance of purity. Even livestock get in on the act. The neighbor's goat stares just a little too long, silently judging you with those unblinking eyes. Your condition is a hot topic for Sunday sermons. The vicar will weave your situation into parables about humility, discretion, and bearing one's burdens quietly. You become a living metaphor for virtue, cautionary tales, and the dangers of letting your corset out too soon. At church, you sit quietly while at least half the congregation sneaks glances over the tops of their hymnals, hoping to catch you in the act of looking modest, tired, or suspiciously content. And let's not forget the street children. They have a unique ability to shout exactly what everyone else is thinking, but is too polite to say. "Miss, when's your baby coming? Did you eat all the pies? Is it true if you swallow a button, the baby will pop out with one eye?" If only you could respond with the kind of wit these situations demand, but alas, you are bound by Victorian manners which dictate that you smile, nod, and pretend your patience is infinite. Public spaces are a gauntlet. Shops, markets, and tea rooms are filled with women who have been through it and believe it is now their sacred duty to ensure you don't make the same mistakes. Every morsel of food you purchase is scrutinized for suitability. "Oh, buying pickles, dear. Well, I suppose some women do, but I never touched a pickle with any of my 6. And they all came out with straight spines and perfect temperaments. It is implied that you're already behind." In the end, public opinion isn't just an abstract force. It's an active, suffocating presence. You're judged for being too cheerful, too pale, too robust, or too thin. Your future child is discussed as if it's already arrived and is currently failing at Latin. You are expected to be invisible, exemplary, humble, and grateful all at once. Survive public opinion in Victorian England, and congratulations. Childbirth itself will be a breeze by comparison. At least a midwife won't bring a goat. Congratulations, you're still expected to scrub, cook, and sew regardless of how many months along you are. If you complain, the solution is simple: more housework. Victorian England is a magical time for anyone who enjoys being simultaneously pregnant and overworked. Unlike modern society, where you might receive well-meaning offers to put your feet up, the 19th century's idea of taking it easy is watching you knit while standing. The household does not run itself, and no one, not your husband, not your mother-in-law, not even the family cat, thinks pregnancy qualifies you for a break. In fact, any sign of fatigue is met with stories about how Aunt Edith birthed twins while churning butter and hosting a dinner for 17. Morning begins with a long list of chores, all dictated by the sacred text known as "What My Mother Did." You're expected to rise early, set the fire, and sweep the hearth before anyone else has finished snoring. If you're feeling queasy, you may pause briefly to dry heave into the chamber pot before preparing breakfast for everyone else. Porridge must be stirred, eggs must be coddled, and bread must be baked, preferably before your morning sickness truly kicks in. All of this while wearing an apron and the resigned expression of a woman who knows she's only halfway through the day. Laundry day is especially joyous. Labor-saving devices are still the stuff of steampunk fantasy. Instead, you're armed with a washboard, a bar of soap, and the hope that your back holds out until the second rinse. Hauling buckets of water from the well counts as gentle exercise according to every woman over 50. If you're lucky, someone might lend a hand with the wringing, but only after remarking on how sturdy you look. After laundry, there's sewing, never-ending, soul-draining sewing. Babies, after all, need a full layette. Nightgowns, caps, bonnets, and mysterious squares of linen that everyone claims are absolutely essential. And if your stitches aren't neat enough, your mother-in-law is ready with a helpful reminder. A crooked seam means a crooked life. Modern maternity leave is a distant science fiction dream. Here, your leave comes the morning your waters break and someone physically bars you from the laundry tub. Cleaning is a daily gauntlet. Dust is the enemy, and no amount of pregnancy is an excuse for letting it win. Floors must be swept, rugs must be beaten, and all evidence of crumbs must vanish before the parlor is declared fit for visitors. Your efforts are not rewarded with praise, but with further instructions, because, as everyone knows, an idle mother leads to idle children. Cooking, too, remains your domain. Meals must be hearty, nutritious, and above all, never late. If your cravings demand something outrageous like oranges in February, you'll settle for boiled carrots and the vague memory of citrus. Your task is to nourish a growing baby, a hungry family, and occasionally an uninvited relative who just popped by. If anything burns, it's attributed to your delicate condition, but not in a good way. Rest is a myth, offered in small increments and always with a catch. Lie down if you must, someone says. But wouldn't you be more comfortable darning socks while you rest? If you're truly desperate, you might attempt to hide behind the curtains with a teacup, but someone will find you and hand you a duster. At night, you collapse in bed, every muscle aching, your feet swollen, and your head filled with a distant dream of a single, uninterrupted nap. In Victorian England, pregnancy means working twice as hard for half the sympathy. Your reward is a reputation for fortitude, the chance to raise equally industrious children, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a warm biscuit at the end of the day. The next morning you'll do it all again, proving that in the Victorian household the real miracle isn't childbirth. It's that anyone got a moment's rest at all. Good luck charms are all the rage. Rabbit's feet, silver spoons, and special medallions to ward off evil spirits. Are they effective? No, but they do make for excellent conversation pieces at tea. In Victorian England, you can't swing a knitted bonnet without hitting some object that's been designated lucky by at least 3 generations and the family cat. Pregnancy is prime time for superstition, and your personal collection of amulets soon threatens to outweigh your baby. Every friend and relative seems determined to bestow upon you their own special talisman. A tiny horseshoe for healthy delivery, a sprig of rosemary for sharp wits, and from your cousin Gertrude, a mysterious pebble that kept her child colic-free through 7 labors. You don't ask questions, you just add it to the pile. The logic behind these charms is never quite clear. Some claim ancient origins. Queen Elizabeth swore by this exact spoon. Others are likely the result of one bored midwife and an unlucky squirrel. You're advised to tuck a silver 6pence under your pillow for prosperity and smooth labor. Wear a blue ribbon around your belly to confuse jealous spirits. Hang a mirror by the front door to bounce back evil eyes. By the end of your second trimester, your bedroom looks less like a nursery and more like the headquarters of a particularly anxious coven. The showstopper in any pregnancy charm collection is, of course, the rabbit's foot. Soft, awkward, and slightly unnerving, it dangles from your chatelaine with all the dignity of a molting dust bunny. Victorians swear by its powers. If you're feeling especially superstitious, you might carry two just in case the baby is twins. Never mind the fact that the original owner of the foot had spectacularly bad luck. This, too, is glossed over at tea. Special medallions engraved with prayers or saints' names are another popular gift, passed from hand to hand like valuable family silver, though with much more melodrama. Aunt Maud insists you wear hers at all times, especially during thunderstorms, eclipses, and Tuesdays. If you accidentally misplace it, you're treated to an afternoon of guilt so profound you consider writing an apology note to Saint Day herself. It doesn't stop at jewelry. Certain foods are imbued with protective powers. Almonds tucked into pockets, bread crusts sewn into petticoats, and cloves pinned to the mattress all promise a trouble-free pregnancy. Whether any of it works is beside the point. The ritual is soothing, and the explanations, while confusing, at least keep you occupied during long evenings, when the baby insists on practicing somersaults. Warding off evil isn't just for your own benefit. It's considered a public duty. A neighbor spies you walking without your protective charm and waves you over, tucking a piece of iron into your glove to keep away the fairies. Passing strangers toss out unsolicited advice. Touch wood if you feel a twinge, or never rock an empty cradle lest you invite bad luck. If you forget a ritual, there's always someone happy to remind you, often with the earnestness of a town crier. The men in your life are typically baffled, but even they're not immune. Your husband might quietly pin a button to his waistcoat for safe passage, or agree after much prodding to carry a sprig of lavender in his coat pocket just to be on the safe side. He'll never admit it, but the one time he left it behind and twisted his ankle on a cobblestone, he spent the next week faithfully repinning it every morning. By the end of pregnancy, you're weighed down with trinkets, herbs, and the collective anxieties of everyone you've ever met. None of it is proven, and most of it is uncomfortable. But the ritual of charms becomes a gentle kind of armor, a way to feel prepared in a world where childbirth is as unpredictable as the English weather. You may not believe in every charm, but they give you something else to do with your hands while you wait, hope, and try to avoid Mrs. Chumley's latest guaranteed talisman. And if nothing else, your collection makes for a smashing story at tea, especially when a medallion falls into the soup. The first flutter of movement is a miracle. It's also a cause for alarm, celebration, or, in one aunt's opinion, a sign you need to eat more seed pudding. Medical science says that's probably normal, but let's not rule out hysteria. For months, you've been quietly, sometimes desperately, waiting for a sign that your baby is actually in there, and not just the result of eating too much questionable mutton. Then one perfectly ordinary afternoon, something shifts. At first it feels suspiciously like indigestion, but then it happens again. A faint, unmistakable flutter somewhere between a butterfly's wing and a rogue pea rolling under your ribs. Congratulations, you've officially experienced quickening, the Victorian term for that first magical baby kick. This is the point when pregnancy, once an abstract community project full of fainting, advice, and rabbit's feet, suddenly gets real. You're no longer just a vessel for everyone's opinions. You're now the arena for a miniature boxing match starring your future heir and whatever you had for lunch. The sense of wonder is quickly followed by panic. Should you tell anyone? If you're wise, you keep it to yourself for about 5 minutes before blurting it out at tea and watching as the entire family leaps into action. Your mother-in-law is the first to react, dabbing her eyes and muttering something about the continuity of the bloodline. Your aunt immediately prescribes seed pudding for strength and possibly to weigh the baby down so it can't float up and cause trouble. Neighbors begin dropping by with their own stories of quickening. Mrs. Chumley, who claims she felt her son kick so hard she spilled her soup, or the postmistress, who says she only knew she was expecting when the baby tapped out a Morse code for help. Everyone has a theory, and every theory is different. Victorian medical science is deeply invested in the quickening milestone, mostly because it gives doctors something concrete to discuss that doesn't involve leeches. The leading theory is that quickening marks the baby's soul entering the body, which is both poetic and deeply alarming. If the baby kicks too soon, it might be an excitable child. If it's late, everyone worries you're lacking in vital spirits. For good measure, the family doctor reminds you that what you're feeling could always be a case of wind, nerves, or latent hysteria. His prescription is rest, avoid strong cheese, and write down every flutter in a small leather-bound notebook. The legal world takes quickening seriously, too. Prior to quickening, you're considered possibly, but not officially pregnant. After quickening, there's no going back. The law, the midwife, and your entire extended family are now invested in your belly's every move. Quickening is the social green light for receiving gifts, tolerating awkward advice, and fielding even more questions from neighbors who have suddenly discovered a passionate interest in the position of your navel. Every little kick or wiggle is analyzed and interpreted like a fortune-telling session gone wild. That was a strong one. You'll have a boy. Mark my words. Feeling movement after stewed prunes? The child will be clever. You soon develop a running commentary in your own mind, trying to decode if that jab was a future poet, a wrestling champion, or just a ghost of last night's turnip soup. As the weeks progress, your baby becomes more assertive, stretching, turning, and on occasion, staging a dramatic protest at 2 a.m. This is when you realize the quickening isn't just a milestone, but a preview of your next few decades. The baby's schedule is unpredictable. The kicks are sometimes uncomfortably close to the bladder, and yet there's an odd reassurance in it all. You're sharing your body with a tiny, determined roommate, and for better or worse, you're in it together. The Victorians may have misunderstood almost everything about pregnancy, but they were right about one thing. That first flutter really is a miracle, even if it's sometimes mistaken for pudding, or doctors ranging from kindly befuddled men with leather bags to complete charlatans selling opium tonics. Both will suggest vigorous walking and not thinking too much. In Victorian England, going to see the doctor is a phrase laced with equal parts hope, dread, and the suspicion that you might have better luck consulting the family cat. The local physician, if you're fortunate enough to have one, arrives at your door in a waft of camphor and mystery. He's usually armed with a stethoscope recently invented, almost never used a battered notebook, and at least one outlandish opinion about the female body. Medicine is a science, yes, but mostly in the same way that alchemy is a science. Equal parts guesswork, folklore, and a splash of theatrical confidence. The consultation begins with a brisk handshake, a long stare at your color, and a series of questions so vague you begin to wonder if you're there to see him or he's there to see you. How's your appetite? Are you keeping cheerful? Have you been exposed to any strong emotions like thunder or French novels? If you mention fatigue or faintness, you can expect a knowing nod followed by a prescription for plenty of brisk walks in the fresh air, regardless of the season, your condition, or the fact that the air outside is mostly cold smoke and judgmental pigeons. If you're lucky, your doctor is one of the kindly types, a man who learned his trade from his father, who learned it from a book which was in turn written by someone who once saw an actual operation. He means well, offering soothing platitudes and the occasional peppermint lozenge. He'll pat your hand and murmur the female constitution is remarkably robust, and then offer some gentle advice to avoid undue excitement, as if your uterus is liable to leap out of your body at the first sign of a heated argument. On the other end of the spectrum, you might encounter the enthusiast, the doctor who's recently attended a lecture and is determined to try out every new idea on the unsuspecting population. This is the man with a case full of bottles, each containing something alarming. Tincture of belladonna, a dab of opium syrup, and the ever-popular laudanum. If you complain of back pain, he'll recommend a tonic to quiet the nerves. For heartburn, he prescribes drops of mercury in water, a solution that, if nothing else, takes your mind off the pregnancy entirely. In between, there are the quacks. The Victorian era is a golden age for medical charlatans, men who show up at the market with snake oil, magnetic belts, and pamphlets promising miraculous cures for female troubles. For a few shillings, you can buy a bottle of Dr. Simpkins' celebrated cordial, which is mostly gin and possibly an actual snake. Oddly enough, it does help temporarily. The side effects, however, include the sudden realization that you've spent the grocery money on a product that's 90% hope and 10% regret. Whatever their style, all doctors agree on one thing. Pregnancy is not a disease. This means they are professionally required to reassure you with a straight face that everything is normal even when you're turning green and haven't slept in days. Their chief instruction is always not to worry, a directive as useful as don't think about elephants. If you dare to express concern, you're politely redirected toward more robust women of history. Why, Queen Victoria herself gave birth 9 times, and she hardly complained at all. Follow-up care is a vague concept. Unless you're a duchess or have the good fortune to be Queen Victoria, checkups are rare. You're left with the doctor's brisk assurances, a small mountain of mysterious powders, and a knowing sense that perhaps not thinking too much is code for we're out of ideas. In the end, dealing with a Victorian doctor is a test of patience, blind faith, and a willingness to nod along while secretly pinning your hopes on ginger tea and survival instinct. It's not medicine as we know it, but at least it comes with a peppermint. The true experts are other women. Midwives show up armed with experience, herbal tea, and a steely gaze that could scare the reaper himself. Wet nurses hover on the horizon, just waiting to inherit your baby and your household gossip. In the grand, chaotic theater of Victorian pregnancy, no one works harder, nor is more quietly terrifying than the midwife. She arrives at your doorstep with the uncanny knack of always appearing just as you're trying to sneak a nap. Her arms are full of mysterious bundles, herbs, old towels, a battered kettle, and a bottle of something so strong it could sterilize a cannon. Unlike the kindly but clueless doctor, the midwife actually knows what she's doing. She's delivered half the village, stitched up a few wayward husbands, and delivered such a volume of advice that you half expect her to start charging rent for her opinions. The first thing you notice is her voice, a calm, no-nonsense tone honed by decades of telling anxious fathers where to stand and children when to keep quiet. She listens to your worries, feels your belly with the focus of a master sculptor, and offers honest assessments. You'll be fine, my love, unless you aren't, and if you aren't, we'll manage. Victorian reassurance at its finest. Her arsenal of remedies makes the doctor's black bag look like a sad picnic basket. She brews herbal teas for every complaint. Raspberry leaf for strength, chamomile for nerves, peppermint for all those little upsets. If you need courage, she slips you a nip of gin just for the nerves. Her hands, large and competent, move with swift confidence as she checks on you, delivers news. The baby's head is low, time to walk up and down the stairs, dear, and fends off useless advice from onlookers with a look that could curdle milk. Hovering somewhere between friend, nurse, and local legend, the midwife isn't the only woman in your maternal orbit. There's also the wet nurse, the answer to what happens when, for reasons medical or social, you cannot or simply will not breastfeed your child. Wet nurses are women paid to nourish your baby, and in wealthier households, they're as essential as the family cook. These women bring with them their own set of customs, stories, and the oddest collection of secrets you'll ever hear in the nursery. They know whose baby is difficult, who got their name from a visiting baron, and who's likely to inherit an Agnes eyebrows. Having a wet nurse is both a blessing and a source of endless gossip. The moment she enters the household, alliances shift. The cook wants to know if she'll eat all the porridge. Your mother-in-law worries she'll fill the child with country habits. Most alarming, the baby sometimes prefers the wet nurse, which leads to a brief existential crisis, followed by more tea and a pointed chat with the midwife. Around these two pillars is a swirling crowd. An army of women and aunts arrive with sturdy advice. Walk more, moan less. Cousins pop in to borrow recipes and remind you how much easier their own pregnancies were. And friends gather to share the latest scandal or sign meaningfully at your ankles. In the background, daughters and sisters-in-law observe everything, taking mental notes for the day they'll join the ranks. If the doctor is the theoretical expert, the women are the practical engineers of childbirth and survival. They may be superstitious, they may be bossy, but they're the glue that holds the Victorian household and occasionally your sanity together. By the time the baby is born, you're less a solitary mother and more the commander of a bustling, loud, advice-giving regiment. It's messy, sometimes overwhelming, but somehow this crowd of midwives, wet nurses, and unstoppable women makes the Victorian pregnancy journey less lonely and just a little bit more survivable. No one calls it a shower, but you do get a parade of neighbors bringing you hand-sewn baby bonnets, cryptic warnings, and at least one pamphlet about the dangers of laughing too hard while pregnant. There's no festive _quote _0 bunting strung across the parlor, no tower of pastel-wrapped gifts or cleverly decorated cupcakes. Instead, the Victorian version of a baby shower is a slow-moving, stealthy social operation, conducted under the polite pretense of a ladies' afternoon. Invitations aren't sent. they're implied. You find out you're hosting when women simply begin arriving shedding shawls and depositing casseroles on every available surface. The first rule of Victorian baby showers is pretend it isn't happening. The guests bring presents, but none of them come from a shop. You receive bonnets knit with suspiciously uneven stitches, intricately embroidered christening gowns, hand-me-down shawls that survived 4 cousins and most of a sheep, and a bewildering array of knitted squares whose purpose will remain forever mysterious. Everything is practical and homemade, presented with stories about past labors, warnings about the local water, and tips on getting stains out of linen. If you're lucky, someone slips in a lemon or two highly priced and rare enough to be used as currency in household negotiations. As the tea is poured and the sandwiches, thin, pale, and filled with something that might be cucumber or might be disappointment, circulate, the conversation turns inevitably to pregnancy lore. Mrs. Chumley recounts the tale of her cousin's labor, which was allegedly so quick the midwife missed the whole event and had to be sent home with only a slice of seed cake for her trouble. Your mother-in-law leans in to share a dire warning. Never hang laundry on a Friday or you'll curse the baby's socks for life. Laughter is allowed, but only the polite, breathless kind. Too much mirth, and someone will thrust a pamphlet into your hands titled The Perils of Overexcitement. Between mouthfuls of cake, crumbly and possibly a week old, guests swap tales of memorable births. Each one more dramatic than the last. Someone inevitably mentions the local vicar who once had to deliver a sermon mid-contraction because the church bell was broken. Advice comes fast and unfiltered. Wrap the baby in nettles to ensure good lungs. Never refuse a second helping of pudding if offered. And don't let a man with red hair into the nursery. Some tips seem oddly personal. Others are clearly recycled from folklore, but all are delivered with absolute certainty. Games, not exactly. Instead, there's competitive guessing about your due date, the size of your ankles, and whether you'll be brave enough to forego chloroform. The closest thing to a party favor is a hand-crocheted doily handed over with the solemn promise that you'll need it when the baby arrives. No one explains how or why. All the while, the social undercurrents are as thick as the clotted cream. Old grudges are reared, alliances are silently forged, and Mrs. Jenkins, who claims to have seen the Queen herself, once offers to read your palm for the baby's fortune. It's part baby celebration, part neighborhood summit, and part thinly veiled contest to see whose labor story is most traumatic. When the afternoon draws to a close, your lap is overflowing with gifts. Your head is swirling with advice, and your pantry is well stocked with more scones than you'll ever eat. Guests gather their wraps, kiss you on the cheek, and depart into the fog, already planning what they'll say about your decor at next week's market. Left in the quiet aftermath, you look around at the remnants, the smell of tea, the leftover sandwiches, and the mountain of slightly lumpy baby clothes. The Victorian baby shower is over. Not that anyone would ever admit it was a party. You're left with a sense of camaraderie, a little anxiety, and a doily you still haven't figured out what to do with. And, of course, a new round of gossip that will outlast the cucumber sandwiches by at least a decade. Exercise is either forbidden or encouraged, depending on who you ask. Walking slowly around the garden is fine. Running, and you'll be excommunicated. In the delicate world of Victorian pregnancy activity is a topic so controversial it might as well be witchcraft. There's no consensus, only a swirling hue of opinion, tradition, and the strong suspicion that you're either doing far too much or not nearly enough. Everyone you know has a theory about what a pregnant woman should be doing with her body, and they're all eager to share. One school of thought, mostly supported by the older generation, insists that movement is dangerous and best avoided. These are the women who believe the womb is an easily startled creature, and one strong jolt, and it may simply pack up and leave. Sit quietly, dear, says your great-aunt, tucking you into a chair as if you're made of sponge cake and optimism. Don't raise your arms above your head, or the baby will get tangled. You're advised to keep knitting, but not too vigorously. Rock gently in the chair and watch the cat nap. Any sign of exertion, and someone will clutch their pearls in horror as if you've just attempted a handstand at the communion rail. The other camp, led by the self-appointed neighborhood health enthusiasts, argues that gentle movement is vital. Take the air. Walk about, urges Mrs. Chumley, who claims to have walked every day through all her pregnancies and only fainted in public twice. Walking is fine as long as it's slow, dignified, and preferably witnessed by several neighbors, so they can confirm you didn't break into a trot. Climbing stairs is a gray area, useful for encouraging the baby along when overdue, but risky. Otherwise, unless the moon is full or your mother-in-law approves. Exercise classes, as you know them, do not exist. There are no prenatal yoga sessions or birthing balls. The only stretch you're likely to do involves reaching for the biscuits on the top shelf, which everyone immediately warns you against. You'll pull something dear, or worse, the baby will be born with long arms. Every story comes with a cautionary tale. Someone's cousin's neighbor once overexerted herself rearranging crockery and had a child who never liked soup. If you're of a certain social status, you might be encouraged to take the waters at Bath or enjoy a respite in the countryside. This involves being wrapped in blankets, fed bland food, and wheeled around a manicured garden like a particularly precious fern. It's called fresh air and exercise, but really, it's supervised loafing, designed to reassure your in-laws that you're not up to anything reckless. Everyday household chores are, of course, not counted as exercise. Hauling laundry, scrubbing floors, or running after children are simply part of the natural order and do not require caution or comment. Only when you announce you're going for a walk does the collective Victorian brain spring into action. Will you take a parasol? Are your shoes sturdy? Should you avoid the park, lest you be startled by a squirrel and accidentally bring on labor? These are the pressing questions of the day. The main danger, in everyone's opinion, is overexcitement. Any physical activity that might raise your heart rate is seen as a slippery slope to catastrophe. Running is out of the question, reserved for emergencies and small children. Dancing is a risk best left to the unmarried. Even laughing too much is frowned upon just in case it unsettles the delicate balance of your innards. In the end, your activity routine is a careful dance between idleness and scandal. Sit too much, and you're at risk of weakness. Move too much, and you're reckless. The safest route is a slow, dignified promenade through the garden, waving politely to neighbors and pretending that your greatest ambition is to see the roses bloom before anyone suspects you've broken into a light jog. Survive Victorian pregnancy, and you deserve a medal not for athleticism, but for surviving the social Olympics of sitting, strolling, and trying desperately not to die of boredom. When the aches hit, there's no Tylenol, just a shot of laudanum, a spoonful of brandy, or the advice to think pleasant thoughts. If that fails, you're allowed to complain, but only to your pillow. Pain is a constant, uninvited house guest throughout the Victorian pregnancy. Your body aches in ways you didn't know possible. Hips grinding, back spasming, feet ballooning until your shoes fit like a pair of angry oysters. The phrase pregnancy glow exists only in dusty etiquette books and the fevered imagination of women who have clearly never been pregnant or have an ironclad sense of denial. The Victorian solution for pain is comfortingly simple. Numb it, ignore it, or blame it on your character. Enter the apothecary with his endless supply of mysterious tinctures. Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, is the Victorian wonder drug. It's recommended for headaches, toothaches, muscle pain, insomnia, sadness, existential dread, and the unbearable sound of your neighbor's piano practice. Take a sip, and you'll soon forget what hurt in the first place. You may also forget where you left your slippers, your knitting, or occasionally your own name. If laudanum seems a bit extreme, there's always brandy. Brandy is the answer to most of life's problems. Cramps, chills, disappointments, and the shock of your mother-in-law's third visit this week. A discreet nip in your tea is perfectly acceptable, provided you never ever admit to it in front of the vicar. For aches that persist, the family doctor will suggest topical remedies, mustard plasters, goose grease poultices, and for reasons known only to history, a cabbage leaf applied directly to the area of discomfort. You haven't truly lived until you've spent an afternoon with your torso wrapped in vegetables, wondering if anyone else in the house can smell you. Beyond the pharmacy, the most common prescription is good old-fashioned optimism. Think pleasant thoughts, says your aunt, who has never met a pain she couldn't outlast with sheer stubbornness. Count your blessings, your neighbor chimes in, as if gratitude for the local bakery's currant buns will distract you from your spine attempting a new yoga pose. Should you be caught wincing or sighing too loudly, you'll be gently reminded that women have been doing this for centuries and that Queen Victoria herself hardly complained at all. Queen Victoria, it must be said, had servants, palaces, and, most importantly, no shortage of laudanum. Complaining, when you must do it, is an art form. You can sigh, you can clutch your back, you can, even if you're careful, lean dramatically against a fainting couch. But outright whining is frowned upon. The only truly safe confidant is your pillow, who listens in loyal silence and never offers advice about walking in the fresh air or just getting on with it. The rest of the household may offer sympathy, but more often you're simply reminded that pain builds character and makes you grateful when it's over. As the months drag on, your strategies become more creative. Warm baths are a luxury if you can manage one, though the water must never be too hot, too cold, or too full of hope. Gentle massage is offered sometimes by a helpful friend, sometimes by a midwife whose hands are sturdy enough to knead bread and baby at the same time. If the pain is too much to bear, you're encouraged to rest a coded message, meaning sit still and try not to notice the baby's latest acrobatics. Yet, through it all, you carry on. You become a master of gritting your teeth and smiling politely, of hiding your discomfort behind an embroidered handkerchief. You learn to endure with grace, or at least with quiet sarcasm and a carefully concealed flask. Victorian pain management equals parts numbness, distraction, and stubborn optimism, because in the absence of Tylenol, sometimes blind hope and a tot of gin are all you've got. Forget classes or birthing balls. You get a stern talk from your mother and maybe a pamphlet about the many ways childbirth could go wrong. Be brave, dear, is as close as you get to encouragement. Childbirth preparation in Victorian England is less empowering ritual and more nervous tradition, seasoned with a pinch of dread. The closest thing to modern prenatal education is a mysterious booklet you're handed with all the optimism of a tax bill. Its title something like What to Expect when you're expecting reasons to worry and cautions to ignore. The illustrations are both terrifying and unhelpful. Vague sketches of women lying stoically in bed, surrounded by stern-faced midwives, and what appears to be a rather judgmental potted plant. Conversations about labor rarely happen in public. Instead, your mother, grandmother, and any passing aunt conspire to corner you at the most inconvenient moment, usually while your elbows deep in laundry or trying to eat pudding in peace. They offer advice in hushed tones, each story a patchwork of warnings and heroic suffering. My second was breech. My third came during the harvest, and my fourth arrived while your father was lost in a snowstorm. But we all survived, except for the cat. Every tale is designed to convince you that yes, it will hurt, and yes, you will probably survive, though there are no guarantees for your dignity. Your mother-in-law, meanwhile, takes a more practical approach. She hands you a knitted blanket for biting on in case you don't get a stick and a list of things to have ready. Extra linens, hot water, and a bottle of gin ostensibly for the midwife, but you suspect it will be commandeered by any nervous man in the vicinity. The family's old birthing chair is dragged out from behind the wardrobe, dusted off, and placed ominously in your bedroom, as if to remind you that many have gone before you, and not all have emerged with their sense of humor intact. Medical professionals don't offer much in the way of reassurance. The family doctor may pop by to remind you that women are built for this sort of thing, which is both comforting and dismissive, and then he quickly returns to his real work drinking tea and avoiding actual labor calls. Instead, you rely on the wisdom of midwives who assure you that babies come when they're ready, and that panic helps no one. Their advice is practical, sometimes blunt. Stay calm, keep breathing, and don't bite anyone unless you absolutely must. There are no breathing techniques, no massage oils, no soothing playlists. Instead, your preparation is mostly mental. Learning to accept pain as inevitable, mastering the art of stoic silence, and developing a healthy respect for the unpredictability of the entire process. You're encouraged to trust your body, though any mention of biology is quickly hushed up with a warning glance. The only physical prep might be a few awkward attempts at walking up and down stairs to hurry things along, though if the neighbors see you, you'll never hear the end of it. What you will get in abundance is a parade of practical warnings. Don't scream too loudly or you'll frighten the livestock. Don't faint unless it's absolutely necessary. And above all, be brave. This phrase is repeated by every woman you know until it loses all meaning, becoming a kind of background chant that echoes in your head at night. By the end, your preparation is a patchwork of handed-down relics, practical fears, and a well-worn blanket to squeeze when things get serious. The day arrives without ceremony, and you face it with a combination of terror and determination that defines generations of women before you. There's no class, no playlist, just a certain knowledge that one way or another you'll get through it, and you might even get to keep the blanket. There's no telling exactly when the baby will arrive, so you wait and knit and listen to your relatives tell horror stories about childbirth in the old country. Welcome to the final act of Victorian pregnancy, a suspense thriller with no schedule and no reliable clocks. The due date is less an exact prediction and more an educated guess based on the alignment of the moon, the firmness of your ankles, and the opinion of the most experienced midwife within walking distance. The doctor, if you can catch him, gives you a wide window sometime between the first frost and the new moon, my dear. Helpful. So you enter a limbo of expectation, pacing the creaky floors, staring at the rain, and knitting tiny booties with a wild, slightly haunted look in your eyes. Knitting becomes your new occupation, not just for necessity, but because it gives your hand something to do while your brain loops through every possible scenario. You start with mittens, then move on to hats, blankets, and for good measure, a scarf for the postman and mittens for the neighbor's cat. There is no end to the knitting. If you run out of yarn, you seriously consider unraveling your husband's best waistcoat. Family visits intensify as the calendar creeps forward. Relatives arrive, bearing advice, lucky baked goods, and an armload of cautionary tales. Your grandmother recounts how she delivered a baby during a blizzard armed with nothing but a soup ladle and a positive attitude. Your aunt insists that waiting too long brings bad luck and suggests herbal tea, specifically the kind that tastes suspiciously like lawn clippings. Each story is meant to reassure, but somehow manages only to increase your anxiety and lower your appetite for pudding. The most persistent visitor is worry itself. Every twinge, every flutter, every hiccup sends you into a spiral of speculation. Is this it? Was that a contraction, or just the baby objecting to yesterday's boiled cabbage? The midwife, who has heard every question 1,000 times, simply pats your hand and tells you to rest when you can, and don't worry, the baby won't stay in forever. You wonder if that's encouragement or a warning. As you wait, you become an unwilling expert in signs and portents. Did you dream about water? Maybe your waters will break soon. Was there an owl hooting in the night? According to your neighbor, that means you'll deliver before sunrise. If the neighbor's cat refuses to cross your path, well, better add another week to your timeline. Even the weather feels significant. Clear skies signal a fast labor. Rain means you'll be waiting. You develop a relationship with the barometer that borders on codependent. Boredom is the constant companion of the overdue Victorian mother-to-be. You're discouraged from taking long walks in case the baby drops out, and you're forbidden from traveling too far lest you end up delivering on the road, an event that would haunt the family history for generations. So you stay close to home, rearrange the linen cupboard, and engage in the time-honored tradition of staring at the clock until your eyes cross. Meanwhile, your own anxieties are stoked by everyone else's. The house fills with nervous energy bed sheets, boiled and reboiled hot water always at the ready, and towels neatly stacked as if you're preparing for a flood. Your husband is so jumpy, he startles at the sound of the kettle. Even the family dog looks at you with a mix of sympathy and alarm. And so you wait. Each day is a mixture of hope, dread, and the slow, relentless ticking of the mantel clock. The baby will come when it's ready, unbothered by schedules, plans, or your desperate wish to get the whole business over with. In the meantime, there's always another row to knit, another story to hear, and another cup of lukewarm tea to sip while you wait for your big, unscheduled moment in Victorian history. When it's time, you're surrounded by a team of determined women and one doctor who's just there for the brandy. There are no epidurals. There's a lot of screaming, praying, and occasionally someone fainting, not you. Labor in Victorian England is an all-hands-on-deck situation. Forget modern hospital suites and gentle encouragement from softly spoken midwives in pastel uniforms. The moment you so much as crease in a suspicious manner, your home is transformed into the scene of a heroic siege. The army of women rallies. Midwife, mother, mother-in-law, and at least 3 neighbors with strong opinions and limited personal boundaries. They arrive armed with towels, hot water, mysterious broths, and the kind of steely determination normally reserved for fending off invading armies. The midwife takes command, her eyes narrowing with focus as she surveys the room. She's the undisputed captain now, and her voice is the only law that matters. Boil more water, she barks. Fetch the scissors. Someone make more tea. You are stripped of your status as mistress of the house and become, for a few brief but unforgettable hours, the most important and least in control person in the building. The doctor, if summoned, makes his appearance with the air of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He checks your pulse, mutters something about the natural order of things, and then retires discreetly to the far corner, keeping a close eye on the decanter. His main function is to look serious, nod gravely, and intervene only if disaster truly strikes or if there's an opportunity for a dignified sip of brandy. Meanwhile, the women, they offer support, mop your brow, and occasionally get into heated debates about which labor position is best, all while rearranging furniture at alarming speed. Your mother-in-law reminds you not to scream too loudly because it frightens the neighbors, while your aunt offers inspirational stories about her own labors, which somehow always involve thunderstorms and sheep. Pain is your companion from the start. There are no painkillers beyond what's in the doctor's bag, and even those are used with caution and suspicion. Instead, you're encouraged to grip the birthing blanket, focus on your breathing, which is mostly hyperventilating with style, and listen for the midwife's instructions. The only relief comes from occasional nips of brandy, more for the audience than for you, and the distraction provided by someone fainting. There's always at least one casualty among the onlookers, a squeamish cousin or an overexcited neighbor who forgot to eat lunch. The soundtrack is a mix of moaning, muttered prayers and the constant frantic activity of women passing towels, wringing hands, and delivering unsolicited advice. Someone starts reciting songs. Someone else tries to read aloud from the pamphlet about positive birth experiences, only to be shushed by the midwife's withering glare. Outside, the world carries on oblivious to your heroic battle within 4 walls. Time during labor ceases to exist. Hours blur together in a fog of discomfort and anticipation. No one really knows what time it is, only that the baby will come when it's ready. The clock ticks, the kettle whistles, and you wonder if you'll ever see your feet again. Through it all, you're the center of a chaotic ballet, a flurry of hands, faces, and encouragement that veers wildly between reassuring and downright alarming. And then finally, at the breaking point of exhaustion, pain, and pure Victorian stubbornness, the baby arrives. There's a sudden silence, a collective intake of breath, and then the triumphant cry that signals both relief and a whole new set of challenges. The midwife hands you your slippery, wailing prize. The doctor toasts you with his brandy. someone faints again for good measure. Welcome to motherhood Victorian style. Equal parts agony, absurdity, and the quiet, undeniable triumph of having survived the real nightmare and lived to tell the tale. No rest for the weary. The second the baby arrives, so does a flood of visitors' opinions and the expectation that you'll be back to running the household before you've even found your slippers. In the moments after Victorian childbirth, you'd be forgiven for thinking a parade had been scheduled in your honor, but with far less confetti and much more unsolicited advice. You have just completed the most exhausting ordeal of your life. Your hair is askew. Your nightgown is in ruins, and you're trying to decide whether to collapse and sleep or simply dissolve into the wallpaper. There is no time for either. The door opens, and in comes the welcoming committee. First to arrive are the closest female relatives, led by your mother-in-law. She glides in with the authority of a 4-star general, inspecting the baby, the linens, and your state of mind. She offers both congratulations and corrections. The baby is beautiful, but perhaps next time, try to smile a bit more during delivery, dear. Her brand of encouragement is a unique blend of pride and mild criticism delivered in a tone that suggests she herself gave birth on horseback and milked the cows on the same afternoon. The midwife hovers close, dispensing tea and advice in equal measure. She assures you the hardest part is over, then hands you a cup of something restorative that tastes suspiciously like sadness and root vegetables. The baby is passed from hand to hand, examined, and declared a fine specimen, as if you've just produced a prize-winning turnip. Visitors, meanwhile, pour in at a pace matched only by your dwindling energy. Neighbors file through the house, some bearing small gifts, knitted socks, boiled sweets, alarming talismans, others arriving empty-handed but rich in opinions. Each has a tip to share. Swaddle the baby tight or he'll grow up wild. Never let the sun fall on his face. Rub a little goose grease on his feet. It worked for my nephew, and now he's a constable. You're trapped in a haze of well-wishing and competitive storytelling, each tale more far-fetched than the last. If you think you'll be allowed to rest, think again. Victorian recovery is an oxymoron. The clock starts ticking the moment the baby draws its first breath. The household will not run itself, and your role as mother is only one item on your rapidly expanding list of duties. Within hours, you're gently encouraged to sit up and freshen yourself for visitors. Within days, you're expected to help organize the next meal, soothe the squabbling siblings, and politely laugh at your uncle's jokes about the new recruit. Your husband, meanwhile, is congratulated by all as if he single-handedly carried and delivered the child. He accepts these accolades with good grace, occasionally peering into the nursery with the cautious air of a man approaching an unfamiliar contraption. He's delighted, bewildered, and only slightly concerned by the number of boiled handkerchiefs multiplying throughout the house. The baby, of course, is the star of the show, swaddled, admired, and passed around like a particularly wriggly loaf of bread. He's subjected to a gauntlet of pinches, pokes, and whispered blessings. The only person who isn't allowed a moment's peace is you. You are congratulated for your bravery, admired for your fortitude, and immediately conscripted back into service. As you stagger through this gauntlet of advice, affection, and expectation, you realize Victorian motherhood is a marathon with no finish line. There are no hospital beds, no weeks of convalescence, just the steady return of daily life with a newborn in tow and a community eager to watch and comment every step of the way. Welcome to postnatal life in the Victorian era, where rest is a rumor and you learn the true meaning of resilience, one visitor, one chore, and one sleepless night at a time. Feeling exhausted, feverish, and sad? Too bad the Victorians call this the vapors. The cure is unsurprisingly not thinking about it. The modern world recognizes postpartum recovery as a delicate period, one deserving of rest care and honest conversations about what it feels like to be physically and emotionally shattered by childbirth. The Victorians, on the other hand, would simply hand you a cup of weak tea and a brisk reminder that women have always managed. Feeling overwhelmed is dismissed as a personal quirk. Feeling physically wrecked, you're just not trying hard enough. Within hours of giving birth, your new reality is a blur of sleepless nights, aching muscles, and a sense of emotional vertigo no one warned you about. You might expect someone to tuck you in, keep the visitors away, and insist you do nothing but rest. Instead, your mother-in-law leans in with a cheery, "You'll feel yourself again soon. Just don't dwell on it, dear." The expectation is clear. Tidy yourself up, make the bed, and maybe iron a shirt or two if you have the time. Your feelings are rarely discussed openly. Any mention of sadness, anxiety, or mood swings is swept aside with a reference to the vapors. This magical catch-all diagnosis covers everything from the blues to a full-blown emotional collapse. The only treatment, ignore it. If your spirits sink low enough, someone might suggest a walk around the garden, but only if you're up for weeding as you go. If you're visibly weepy, you're quietly encouraged to take a little air. The cure for all that ails as long as you can carry laundry with you. Physical pain, meanwhile, is as unmentionable as bodily functions at the dinner table. If you complain about stitches bleeding or back pain, you're told to keep cheerful. There's no Tylenol, no ice packs, and certainly no sitz baths, just a battered hot water bottle and a prayer that the house stays warm. The only concession to your recent heroism is a mildly lumpy pillow and the privilege of choosing which sibling will dust the parlor that afternoon. Sleep deprivation is a given. The baby wakes throughout the night, demanding to be fed, soothed, or simply admired for surviving the first 24 hours. Your body screams for rest, but the household demands otherwise. By dawn, you've been up 5 times, changed 3 nappies, and soothed the fussy newborn while your husband snores peacefully across the room, blissfully unaware of the chaos on your side of the bed. If you dare mention your exhaustion, someone reminds you that Queen Victoria herself had 9 children and never missed a garden party. The mental toll of postpartum recovery is immense, though not spoken of in polite company. You may feel a sadness that lingers, a sense of disconnect, or a fear that you'll never be the same again. Instead of counseling or a kind ear, you get brisk advice. Don't let yourself wallow. Or if you're particularly unlucky, perhaps a cold bath would clear your head. Should you persist, the family doctor appears with a bottle of tonic and the assurance that you simply need more fresh air, less introspection, and a drop of laudanum, if absolutely necessary. In the rare moments you find solitude, you might allow yourself to grieve silently for the loss of your old self or for the tidal wave of new responsibility. Then with a deep breath, you tuck away your feelings, straighten your cap, and return to the fray. Fortified only by willpower and whatever cake the latest visitor has brought. Postpartum recovery in the Victorian era is a lonely, thankless job, one that requires resilience, a sense of humor, and above all, the ability to soldier on in the face of fatigue and the world's most useless advice. But you manage because there's no other choice. And one day, weeks or months later, you wake up and realize you are astonishingly a little stronger for it. Feeding your baby is a mixture of ancient remedies, cow's milk, and the hope that the bottle wasn't cleaned with arsenic soap. Every baby is colicky. Every remedy is worse than the last. In the brave new world of Victorian infant care, your choices are dictated by tradition, convenience, and the wildly conflicting advice of everyone who's ever met a baby. The first question, naturally, is whether you will breastfeed. The answer depends on a complex social equation involving your social status, the shape of your nose, and your mother-in-law's opinion. For some, nursing is a point of pride. Nothing better for the child than his own mother's milk. For others, it's a necessary evil best handed off to a sturdy wet nurse, or failing that, a cow with a reliable track record and patient temperament. If you do attempt breastfeeding, prepare for a host of unsolicited advice. You were told to eat oats for quantity, beef tea for quality, and to avoid strong emotions at all costs, lest the baby ingest your upset humors along with breakfast. Should feeding prove difficult, as it often does, the local midwife swoops in with a cup of fenugreek tea and a suggestion to think calming thoughts. Your great-aunt, meanwhile, swears by drinking stout for a better letdown. The result: you're mildly tipsy, still hungry, and the baby remains unimpressed. Bottle feeding is a perilous alternative. Victorian bottles, called murder bottles by modern historians, are notorious for their creative engineering and their tendency to harbor every microbe in a 10-mile radius. Made from glass, pot, or even wood, these contraptions are often so difficult to clean that you suspect some are designed by your worst enemy. The rubber nipples, meanwhile, are rarely boiled and sometimes scrubbed with questionable substances, including arsenic lace soap or the leftover ends of lye bars. What goes in the bottle is an adventure all its own. The recipe changes from house to house. Cow's milk watered down and sweetened with sugar or honey barley water, or a mysterious gruel containing anything from mashed potato to arrowroot. The hope is that the concoction will nourish the baby. The reality is that it more often nourishes the ants and tests your patience. Colic is inevitable, and the remedies are legion, ranging from gentle rocking and herbal tea to brandy on the gums and the application of mysterious poultices. One neighbor recommends chamomile. Another insists on dill water, and someone is always ready with a bottle of Godfrey cordial, a mixture of opium and trial. Perfect for knocking out both baby and, if you're not careful, the rest of the household. Hygiene is at best a moving target. You wash the bottles as best you can, trusting that a brisk rinse and a whispered prayer will keep the worst at bay. Meanwhile, every surface in the nursery is a study in contrasts. The crib is spotless, the floorboard suspiciously sticky, and there's always a faint whiff of old cabbage, no matter how many posies you hang from the window. Sleep is a rare and precious commodity. Every night is an odyssey of feeding, burping, and comforting a baby who has not read the parenting manuals and is determined to write his own. The midwife encourages swaddling for security, though the baby wriggles like an eel and howls at every attempt. When all else fails, you pace the hallway singing lullabies and plotting the invention of modern infant formula. Despite the chaos, your baby survives, and so do you. The rituals of feeding, burping, and soothing become the rhythm of your new life. You learn to ignore the worst advice, rely on your instincts, and celebrate small victories like the day you discover a bottle can in fact be boiled and the baby sleeps for more than 3 hours at a stretch. Victorian infant care may be a jumble of old wives' tales and herbal nightmares, but somehow the babies and the mothers emerge resilient, resourceful, and at the end of the day just a little bit tougher than they were before. Victorian nurseries are beautiful in paintings and absolute biohazards in real life. The toys are sharp, the paint is toxic, and the nanny is slightly terrifying. Step inside a proper Victorian nursery, and it looks at first like a picture out of a sentimental novel. Sunbeams slanting through lace curtains, a cradle carved with cherubs, and rows of dainty toys arranged with military precision. It's only when you look closer that you notice the hazards lurking in every corner. The dolls have glass eyes and sharp porcelain limbs perfect for drawing blood. The rocking horse, meant for healthy exercise, is large enough to knock over a small ox, and frequently shed splinters with every ride. Stuffed animals are filled with sawdust, possibly fleas, and at least one forgotten sewing needle. The walls painted a lovely shade of arsenic green glow eerily in the twilight and amid invisible clouds of poison. The nursery window opens just wide enough to admit fresh air and the odd spy pigeon, but not quite wide enough for a proper escape attempt by you or the baby. Every item of furniture seems to be on wheels, ensuring that at the slightest nudge, the whole room rearranges itself like an overzealous poltergeist. The main inhabitant, of course, is the nanny, a figure simultaneously revered and feared. Nanny is always upright, always alert, and always ready to detect the smallest infraction. Her shoes never squeak. Her hair is in an iron bun that doubles as a weapon. She dispenses discipline with a firm hand, a steely stare, and the uncanny ability to appear at your elbow the moment you consider breaking a rule. She runs the nursery like a small army outpost. Breakfast at 7 o'clock, naps at precisely 11 o'clock, and absolutely no mischief after supper. If you cross her, you'll find yourself confined to your crib to think about what you've done, which, considering the state of the wallpaper, may be more dangerous than whatever got you into trouble in the first place. Toys are chosen for their moral value, not their safety. Alphabet blocks are solid wood and perfectly engineered for maximum stub toes. Jack-in-the-boxes pop up with the force of minor explosions. Whistles, drums, and other entertainments are mostly for the benefit of adults who want to build character through shared suffering. Books feature alarming tales about children who talk back to their elders or neglect their mending, ending up in various states of ruined disgrace, or most dire of all, sent to bed without supper. Cleanliness in the nursery is more of an aspiration than an achievement. The carpet, lovingly referred to as the rug, hasn't been truly clean since the Great Exhibition. Bath time is a communal event featuring chilly water, harsh soap, and the persistent belief that children are sturdier when scrubbed briskly and left air dry. Bedtime means being swaddled within an inch of your life in scratchy sheets that smell faintly of mothballs and something medicinal. Despite the perils, the nursery is also a place of warmth, camaraderie, and whispered secrets after lights out. Siblings and cousins form temporary alliances to outwit the ever-watchful nanny, inventing games with marbles and leftover bread crusts. You learn early how to avoid splinters which toys to hide, and how to sneak biscuits without getting caught. There's laughter, too. Giggling under covers, hush-hush plans to tunnel under the rug, wild tales of what you'll do when you're grown and in charge. Survival is as much about wits and luck as it is about obedience. If you make it to your first birthday without a chipped tooth or a mild case of arsenic poisoning, you're considered robust. And if you survive the nanny's inspection, the dampness, the splinters, and the parade of terrifyingly wholesome cautionary tales, you'll emerge in childhood a little tougher, a little wearier, and if nothing else, fully inoculated against the dangers of decorative porcelain. Welcome to the Victorian nursery. Beautiful, dangerous, and the very first test of your survival instincts. Once you survive, congratulations, you're expected to start the process all over again. Your only reward, a larger collection of questionable advice, and the unspoken understanding that in the Victorian era, surviving pregnancy was a career in itself. The ink is barely dry on your last congratulatory note, the inkling of recovery still wishful thinking, and already the machinery of family and society starts up again. So, when's the next one? Whispers your neighbor, as if childbirth were a hobby you might enjoy perfecting on weekends. It's a question delivered with the sort of optimism only found in people who have never personally experienced the joys of endless laundry, sleepless nights, and the persistent ache of a body that's been through the ringer, literally. The Victorian ideal is a bustling home filled with children. 8, 10, 12 numbers are spoken of casually, as if each one simply pops out with a polite, "How do you do?" and knitted bonnet. Fertility is both a badge of honor and a family expectation, and you're measured not only by the health of your current offspring, but by the speed at which you produce more. Your husband, puffed up with pride, accepts congratulations as if he personally did the hard part, while you're counting the days until your next round of delicate condition begins. The process itself is unromantic, governed by the same unyielding routines and advice that guided your first pregnancy. Only now you have the benefit of experience and a healthy skepticism about every word of it. The morning sickness arrives right on time, joined by a chorus of children who need feeding, cleaning, and refereeing. Rest when you can, says your mother-in-law, but don't neglect the mending. The midwife gives you a knowing look, one that says, "Back again." Are we? Kettle's always on. This time, you're armed with practical wisdom and a longer list of things to avoid. You know which neighbor to dodge when she arrives with her latest charm, "Rub this horseshoe just in case," and which cousin's advice to ignore. My youngest was teethed on pickled onions, and look at him now. Never sick a day in his life apart from all the days he was sick. The parade of gifts repeats itself, as does the flood of advice. Only now, your pile of knitted booties is threatening to take over the linen cupboard, and you suspect you could open a small shop selling leftover baby bonnets. Fatigue becomes a familiar companion, and so does resignation. There's little space for self-pity and even less for rest. You are a veteran, now able to change a nappy with one hand, rock a cradle with the other, and still keep an ear out for the sound of the porridge boiling over. If you have a wet nurse, she's now a trusted lieutenant in the campaign for survival. If not, you learn to nurse discreetly during family meals, conversations, and on particularly challenging days while mediating arguments about who stole the last biscuit. The only break comes in the form of brief, whispered moments with other mothers. Over cold tea and crumbs, you share your triumphs and grievances, knowing that someone else somewhere is up at 2 a.m., wrestling with the same impossible expectations. Together, you form a silent, unbreakable league, experts at endurance, masters of multitasking, and reluctant champions in the great unending relay race of Victorian motherhood. By the time your youngest is old enough to toddle, you're both exhausted and quietly proud. The house is loud, chaotic, and bursting with life, a testament to your tenacity and the peculiar mix of love habit and institutionalized denial that fuels the Victorian mother. Each new pregnancy is met with side smiles and, inevitably, more advice. In the end, surviving Victorian pregnancy over and over becomes less a singular triumph and more a way of life. You've earned every wrinkle, every story, and every slightly ridiculous superstition. Because here in the land of endless children, the career of being a mother is never finished, and that somehow is its own strange reward. One of the great joys of Victorian pregnancy is a nose that could outsniff a bloodhound. Every whiff is a new challenge. Cabbage, stew, coal, smoke chamber pots, fermenting in the hall, and the overwhelming signature scent of your husband's hair pomade. The Victorian solution? Pour on the rose water and hope you don't faint in a cloud of lavender and disappointment. Pregnancy in the 19th century does strange and terrible things to your senses. If you thought morning sickness was bad, just wait until your newly developed olfactory powers turn every room into a minefield of scents. The moment you step into the kitchen, you're ambushed by the ghost of 1,000 boiled dinners. Every pot of cabbage, every stew of indeterminate origin, and every herring pie leaves a vapor trail that clings to curtains and hair for weeks. You can identify last night's dinner with a single sniff. A party trick nobody wants to see demonstrated. The parlor is no sanctuary either. What should be a pleasant retreat for sipping tea and pretending you haven't noticed the dust instead greets you with a complex bouquet of damp wool mothballs and pipe tobacco. On good days, this is merely offensive. On bad days, it's enough to make you long for a fainting couch and perhaps a time machine. Chamber pots, those essential yet odious accessories, add their own note to the symphony. Despite the best efforts of maids with strong arms and weak stomachs, the hallway often features a subtle undertone of essence of chamber pot. A special treat awaits on laundry day when the pots are gathered emptied, and if you're very lucky, scrubbed with something resembling soap. You do your best to hold your breath and hurry past a skill that's surprisingly useful for surviving the Victorian era in general. Of course, your husband's grooming habits only make matters worse. His pomade, an unholy blend of bare fat, perfume, and hope, wafts through the house long after he's left for work. It clings to his pillows, his handkerchiefs, and any room he spent more than 5 minutes in. If you were fond of roses, violets, or lavender, before those scents are now forever ruined, tainted by their association with a man who believes more is always better. For relief, you turn to perfume. Victorian women are encouraged to fight fire with fire, or more accurately, scent with scent. Bottles of rose water, violet cologne, and orange blossom water fill every corner, all used liberally in an attempt to mask the odor of daily life. Every linen is spritzed, every wrist dabbed, and every handkerchief soaked, until it's a wonder you don't dissolve into a floral puddle. You carry a vinaigrette, a tiny bottle of strong-smelling salts ready to deploy at the first sign of trouble. The danger, of course, is that the competing perfumes mingle with a background funk, creating something new and much, much worse. Then there's the world outside. Coal smoke drifts through the city streets, blending with the more natural aroma of horse and occasional waft of fish. Stepping out for air sometimes means returning with a whole new set of smells stuck to your dress. Even a garden isn't safe. After a rain, the scent of wet earth compost and whatever the neighbor's dog has been up to can push even the hardiest soul to the brink. Your only hope is adaptation. You learn to breathe shallowly, seek out cross breezes, and claim the window seat at every opportunity. Scent sachets are tucked into every drawer. Bunches of lavender hang from every beam, and you consider lobbying Parliament for mandatory fresh air acts. And so you survive one scent, one grimace, one desperate spritz of rose water at a time. By the end of your pregnancy, your sense of smell is both your superpower and your tormentor. But if you can withstand the daily onslaught of odorous regret, you can face anything Victorian life has to throw at you, one deep breath or not at a time. Victorian advice on intimacy while pregnant ranges from absolutely forbidden to maybe if you really must, but only on Tuesdays and never with the windows open. Physicians, clergymen, and Mrs. Chumley all have wildly different opinions, but they agree on one thing. You should definitely feel very guilty about whatever you decide. In the world of Victorian pregnancy, your body is suddenly the most discussed, debated, and legislated piece of property in the entire neighborhood. The matter of marital relations is a social and scientific minefield. Advice comes from all directions, much of it contradictory, all of it delivered with a level of discomfort that could curdle milk. The mere suggestion of romance is enough to set off a chain reaction of raised eyebrows, nervous coughs, and at least one relative fainting gently onto a chaise lounge. Physicians, those bewildered, slightly befuddled custodians of public health, are split down the middle. Some insist that marital relations must cease entirely during pregnancy, lest you overexcite the womb, or worse, instill moral weakness in the child. Others, reading from the latest French medical treatise, whisper that a gentle embrace is acceptable provided it's conducted in a spirit of moderation, secrecy, and possibly in another county. Your own doctor, when pressed, turns pink and mutters something about nature's mysteries before prescribing either a brisk walk or a large glass of cherry, depending on the weather. Clergymen, meanwhile, see the issue as a test of spiritual fortitude. The marital bed is sacred, but so too is the virtue of restraint, booms the Sunday sermon. Any act that could be seen as indulgent, especially while in a delicate condition, is discouraged, if not outright condemned. At least one pamphlet circulates in the parish warning of dire consequences for mothers who yield to desire ranging from fainting fits to a child with restless inclinations. The consensus is chastity is next to godliness, especially on weekdays. Social opinion, as usual, is the most creative. Mrs. Chumley is an authority on the matter, having borne 8 children and at least 12 pamphlets about decorum. Her view is best to avoid any and all excitement, dear, unless you want the baby to arrive early and with opinions. Your mother-in-law, equally helpful, recalls that in her day, couples slept in separate rooms from the moment a single button burst off a bodice. If you dare express curiosity, every woman within earshot offers conflicting advice, all cloaked in a haze of euphemisms and alarming warnings. Privacy is nearly impossible. Victorian houses are full of paper-thin walls, creaking floorboards, and an endless supply of relatives who wander the halls at all hours carrying lanterns, complaints, and mysterious errands that cannot wait until daylight. A moment of intimacy is a logistical feat requiring subterfuge, stealth, and an escape plan should anyone knock on the door. You find yourself whispering like a conspirator, worried the wallpaper will gossip if you so much as hold hands after supper. All this attention ensures that regardless of what you do or don't do, you are gripped by a knowing sense of guilt. If you avoid intimacy, you risk your husband's disappointment and Mrs. Chumley's pitying glances. If you indulge, you wait for sky to fall or your doctor to drop by with a lecture about the nerves. The result is an uneasy truce. You do what feels right or safe or simply possible, then vow never to bring it up again. The greatest irony is most babies arrive healthy and opinionated regardless of which advice you followed. Looking back, you realize the only real consequence of Victorian marital relations is an impressive ability to dodge questions, master the art of silent communication, and develop a finely tuned sense of humor about the whole absurd affair. In the end, whether you touched, didn't touch, or simply exchanged knowing looks and long silences, you did it all under the watchful eye of history propriety and Mrs. Chumley, and you survived guilt, gossip, and all. Choosing a baby name is a group project. Your mother-in-law votes for Eustace. Your husband likes Alfredina, and your neighbor suggests naming the child after the Queen in case she visits. Meanwhile, you just want something that doesn't rhyme with cholera. In the end, tradition wins, and the poor baby is saddled with a name that sounds like a minor plague. The naming of a Victorian baby is less an act of parental preference and more of a protracted high-stakes negotiation involving every relative friend and passing milkman. You might believe foolishly that as the mother, you have the final say. In reality, your opinion ranks just above the family parrot and slightly below the town's postmistress. The process begins almost the moment the baby's gender is announced, with suggestions trickling in like unwanted rain through a leaky roof. Family tradition is the most sacred and least flexible factor. The firstborn son, by law of grandmothers everywhere, must be named after his paternal grandfather. If that happens to be Eustace, so be it. Resistance is futile. The threat of breaking a decades-long line of Eustaces is enough to send Aunt Millicent to bed with a case of the nerves. For girls, tradition dictates a choice between every woman in the family tree, living or dead. This results in names like Mary Jane Elizabeth, all hyphens and hope, or Alfredina, in honor of that one cousin who moved to Australia and was never heard from again, possibly by choice. Fashion also plays its part. The Victorians are nothing if not trend-conscious. Names like Gertrude Percival and Agnes are all the rage, conjuring up images of starchy propriety and a lifetime of reciting poetry in cold drawing rooms. If you suggest something daring like Daisy or Jack, you're met with polite horror and the whispered suggestion that such names are suitable only for stable boys or pets. Social pressure is relentless. Neighbors weigh in eager to share the story of how their own little Matilda is the pride of the district, or how naming your baby Victoria might one day result in a royal visit. Unlikely, but never say never. The local vicar offers his own short list, each name with a suitably biblical ring, and subtly hints that naming the child after a saint guarantees good luck, or at least a better seat at church. Your own wishes are lost in the shuffle. Perhaps you long for something cheerful, simple, and unlikely to attract teasing on the playground. A name that doesn't sound like a skin condition or a Victorian ghost story. Instead, You are swept along by the current of tradition, fashion, and family drama, until at last the christening day arrives. The ceremony itself is a spectacle, as all the invested parties gather to see which name emerges victorious. The priest, reading from a list longer than the book of Leviticus, finally settles on a combination that pleases everyone and no one. Eustace Alfred Percival, if it's a boy, or Mary Ann Gertrude, if it's a girl. You say the names aloud and wonder if the baby will ever forgive you. In the days that follow, the poor child acquires a variety of nicknames, some affectionate, some practical, all attempts to sidestep the full horror of the official moniker. Little Percy Gertie, or simply the baby become household standards, while the more elaborate name is reserved for stern occasions and the inscribing of silver spoons. Still, there is a peculiar comfort in the ritual. Naming a baby in Victorian England is a communal act, a way of binding the new child to the generations who came before and sometimes apologizing for them. The name may be unwieldy, a bit outdated, or downright unfortunate, but it carries with it stories, memories, and enough tradition to last a lifetime. And if your Eustace, Alfredina, or Victoria ever question your decision, you can truthfully say, we did it for the family, and also because Mrs. Chumley would never have let us hear the end of it. Pregnancy is as much a religious experience as a physical one. The church expects regular appearances at services, endless confessions, and a level of piety that's hard to achieve when you're craving boiled onions at midnight. Every hiccup is a potential sign from God, and the local priest is always ready with a sermon about modesty, morality, and the dangers of laughing while pregnant. In Victorian England, your growing belly is not just a sign that you're expecting a baby. It's evidence that you've been up to marital activity, a subject the church regards with a mixture of fascination, anxiety, and deep suspicion. The vicar's wife begins dropping by more frequently armed with leaflets about the sanctity of womanly duty, and frowns sharp enough to slice bread. You soon learn that spiritual wellness is a full-time job, and pregnancy is both a divine blessing and a terrifying public responsibility. Church attendance is non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if you're exhausted, nauseous, or fighting off a bout of the vapors. You're expected in your pew hat, securely pinned hands, folded in a display of humility. If you so much as yawn during the second reading, Mrs. Chumley will whisper that evening services are more forgiving of delicate constitutions. Should you skip a Sunday, the entire parish embarks on a spirited round of speculation about your health, your morals, and the last time anyone saw you buy bread at the baker's. Every aspect of your spiritual life is under gentle but relentless scrutiny. Prayer is prescribed daily, sometimes hourly, depending on your perceived level of virtue. Should you sneeze in church, a kindly parishioner might suggest a special prayer to ward off impure thoughts, or at the very least, a double helping of confession next week. Confession itself is a delicate dance as the priest tries and fails to keep a straight face while discussing temptations of the flesh and the risks of listening to scandalous novels while expecting. Pregnancy cravings are especially suspect. Any sudden desire for exotic foods or even an extra slice of bread is greeted with grave concern. The local priest gives an entire sermon on gluttony, the silent temptation timed perfectly with your third trimester. Midnight snacks are considered, if not outright sinful, at least a cause for repentance. You begin to wonder if every bout of indigestion will be interpreted as a minor spiritual failing. Moral panic doesn't stop at food. Laughter, merriment, or even the suggestion of a joke is met with raised eyebrows. The Church warns against frivolity, lest the child be marked with laughter and grow up light-minded. Your mother-in-law nods approvingly, declaring that a sober mother begets a serious child, which is apparently the highest compliment Victorian society can bestow. You're encouraged to keep your conversations uplifting, which means more psalms, fewer stories about your neighbor's cat. Every milestone quickening swelling ankles, a sudden craving for elderflower cordial is met with a prayer, a reading from Proverbs, or a well-placed warning about the dangers of pride. Should you show any sign of vanity or walk around your belly, the priest will work it into a Sunday sermon. The message is clear. Your body is not your own, but a vessel for divine will, family reputation, and the local church's weekly gossip quota. By the time the baby arrives, you've amassed a collection of prayer cards, holy water, and more spiritual advice than you can shake a hook at. The entire community congratulates you on bearing your burden with grace, a phrase that does little to soothe your aching back, but does wonders for your church attendance record. In the end, Victorian pregnancy is both a spiritual crisis and a community event, equal part sacred duty and public spectacle. You survive it all with a steady hand, a quiet prayer, and a secret stash of pickled onions hidden under your pillow, just in case midnight cravings strike. And when the next sermon begins, you smile, sit up straight, and try not to laugh, lest you spark another moral panic. So, as our night together winds down, let's take a moment to marvel at just how much Victorian women endured often with nothing but a fraying shawl, a questionable cup of tea, and the kind of inner strength that could frighten a horse. You survived fainting spells, medical advice that involved more laudanum than logic, and an endless parade of people with opinions about your womb. You dodged the dangers of arsenic, the vapors, and a household run entirely on superstition and stale air. And you did it all while wearing 6 layers of wool and smiling politely through a haze of rose-scented regret. Tonight, as you settle into your clean, soft bed pillows, arranged just so thermostat at your preferred temperature, indoor plumbing reassuringly nearby, maybe spare a grateful thought for the generations who came before you, for the women who labored literally and figuratively in times when comfort was a rumor and rest was a luxury. Maybe even send up a little thank you to the ancestors who survived corsets, coal stoves, and childbirth before antibiotics. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that people are incredibly stubborn, often ridiculous, and far more resilient than anyone gives them credit for. So rest easy, knowing your worst discomfort tonight is probably just a flat pillow or a snoring spouse, and not a doctor prescribing you brandy for your nerves. You made it through Victorian pregnancy, at least in spirit. Sleep well, dream deeply, and may your night be blissfully free of old wives' tales, suspicious soups, and surprise visits from Mrs. Chumley. Good night, my dear.